hide and seek. Because, seriously, what happens when an uninvited player suddenly joins a completely innocent childhood game?
That is the exact question we're diving into today. What happens when you realize you aren't the only one hiding? We're going to examine 3 distinct, honestly terrifying case studies pulled directly from the source material. These are stories where this familiar, everyday game transformed into dangerous, real-world encounters.
So let's just ground ourselves in the actual mechanics of the game for a second. The rules are pretty universal, right? Count to 50, hide in the dark, stay perfectly still. But when you look at these steps logically, you realize something profoundly unsettling. That very requirement to stay perfectly still and silent in the dark, it makes you uniquely, terrifyingly vulnerable to anyone else who might be out there. You are literally actively turning off your own situational awareness.
All right, let's dive into this with case study 1, the house guest.
This first scenario focuses heavily on the sheer claustrophobia of a home invasion, especially when you think you are totally alone. So picture this. A 15-year-old boy is home alone and invites his best friend Chris over for a late-night game. The house is pitch dark. The narrator decides to hide upstairs under the guest room bed, pulling the bed skirt down so he's totally concealed. He fully expected his friend Chris to walk in and search the room, but instead, he heard slow, heavy footsteps enter the room and stop right next to the bed. He just lay there completely frozen, listening to unknown heavy breathing and the shuffling of shoes on the carpet, mere inches from his face.
Eventually, the person standing by the bed leaves the room. The narrator, assuming Chris just gave up, crawls out and heads downstairs. He calls out that the game was over, but then Chris shouted back that he was still looking for him from the basement. Chris had been down there the entire time. Just imagine that stomach-twisting realization, that heavy breathing in the upstairs guest room, that belonged to an absolute stranger.
Now the game had ended, but the horror definitely hadn't. And this brilliantly illustrates the tension of the situation. Sitting frozen in the living room, the boys tracked an escalating nightmare right above them. First, a loud bump upstairs. Then, a slow creak of floorboards moving down the hall. Armed with just a fireplace poker, they crept back upstairs to investigate and heard the most chilling detail of all. It was a slow, dragging noise, kind of like fabric sliding across the carpet, coming from behind the closed guest room door.
Shaking, they pushed a bedroom door open. Nothing. They check the closet, totally empty. They start to nervous laugh, trying to convince themselves it's just their imagination playing tricks on them. But then, a long silence. A really suffocating quiet that was suddenly shattered by a sound downstairs. The front door opening and closing, followed by footsteps pacing on the first floor. The intruder was actually moving between the floors, tracking them.
At that point, the boys sprinted out the back door to a neighbor's house and called the cops. But in the aftermath, police found absolutely no signs of forced entry, nobody hiding in the basement. The authorities ultimately just dismissed the threat, chalking the whole ordeal up to, quote, the house settling, or an overactive imagination. And that left the boys with the horrifying, unprovable knowledge that someone had been silently hiding inside their own locked home.
Moving right along to case study 2, the dark woods.
So we're moving from a claustrophobic house to a vast, uncontrollable environment to experience what we call visual paranoia. It's the terrifying realization that shadows and trees are masking an active, observing threat. Think about it. In the daytime, the woods are just trees. But at night, the lack of visibility completely removes your ability to know who is nearby. The environment itself becomes hostile because it provides perfect cover for anyone who wants to watch you unseen.
Our source introduces a 14-year-old narrator playing with a group of friends in the pitch-black woods behind their neighborhood. He's hiding behind a fallen log, and his experience was absolutely terrifying. He heard slow, heavy footsteps crunching through the leaves right past his hiding spot, and later, a low, soft whisper just inches away in the tall grass. He assumed it was his friend Jason, who was the designated seeker. But Jason's experience was entirely different. He never went that deep into the woods. In fact, none of the friends were anywhere near the narrator's hiding spot. The narrator tries to brush off the whispers and the heavy footsteps, really hoping his friends are just messing with him. But back in the safety of the yard, the youngest boy, Matt, dropped a terrifying detail. He said, and I quote, "The man didn't move, just stood there watching." Matt had seen a tall, unmoving stranger observing them play from the tree line. So that whisper in the dark, it wasn't a joke. It was a spectator hiding in the pitch black right alongside them.
Now, what's really interesting about this next one is how things escalate. Case Study 3, The Stranger Keith.
In this scenario, the threat dramatically escalates. We move from a passive watcher in the woods to a tangible, aggressive stalker. It starts on a hot summer afternoon in rural Pennsylvania. The narrator and his friends are playing basketball when an older teenager wanders up. Immediately, there are massive warning signs. First, he's an unrecognized 16-year-old calling himself Keith. Second, he specifically suggests playing Manhunt, which is a much more aggressive, massive version of hide-and-seek. Third, he chillingly claims the narrator's yard is perfect for hiding, which really implies he's already studied the layout of their private property. And the biggest red flag of all, he completely vanishes mid-game without a single word.
Because Keith didn't just go home, he actually brought the game of Manhunt directly into the narrator's house that night. Let's walk through this timeline. At sunset, the narrator finds a dirty, weathered piece of rope lying in the grass right outside his bedroom window. Creepy, right? Fast forward to 11 p.m. The narrator is in bed and hears soft, stealthy footsteps stop right outside his bedroom door, followed closely by the heavy sound of the front door shutting. He wakes his dad, they search the property with a shotgun but find nothing. And then, the true nightmare begins at 2 a.m. with a scratching sound right at his bedroom window.
I really want you to focus purely on the sensory horror of this moment. Dragging a stick or a nail against the glass. It's 2 a.m. The house is completely dark and dead silent. And right beside your head, just on the other side of a thin pane of glass, is that slow, deliberate scratching. It's a sound designed to provoke you. It practically forced the terrified narrator to reach out and crack his blinds open just to see what was out there.
And when he finally cracks those blinds, he comes face to face with this nightmare, the shape of someone standing inches away in the dark. The hunter from the afternoon game had returned to finish playing. The narrator screams, and his father bursts out of the house, firing 2 warning shots from his shotgun into the air, which finally sends the figure fleeing into the night. Keith was literally actively stalking the narrator through his own bedroom window.
This brings us to the ultimate psychological terror.
So the crucial point here is that these stories are incredibly unsettling, but they aren't just isolated, creepy anecdotes. Across all 3 distinct scenarios, there's a shared, underlying threat. In case 1, the house guest invaded the ultimate safe space, the locked home. In case 2, the watcher in the dark woods exploited the shadows to observe the players unseen. And in case 3, the stranger Keith actively hunted the narrator on his own property. Despite the completely different environments, they all brilliantly illustrate one terrifying core element: the total subversion of safety.
And that brings us to a terrifying truth about all 3 of these case studies. The danger was absolutely real, flesh and blood. It wasn't supernatural. The true terror is rooted in the horrific vulnerability we willingly create for ourselves. Think about it. We intentionally turn out the lights. We intentionally trap ourselves in small, unescapable corners under beds or behind logs. We make ourselves totally blind and deaf to the real world, all just for the thrill of a game.
We seek out the thrill of being hidden, completely forgetting that the dark provides cover for everyone, not just the players. Which leads us to the most unsettling thought of all, and exactly what you should take away from our explainer today. Next time the lights go out, when you hide in the dark, who is hiding with you?